to Jane Doe number 1, what were you asked to do?
I was asked to go to the scene.
Is that you and your mother's GoFundMe page?
It's my GoFundMe page.
On behalf of your mother?
Yes,
How much money were you seeking to get?
$50,000.
What did she tell her husband?
She pointed out the suspect who's in the jacuzzi and said he's the one who was masturbating, and her husband identified the suspect as the football player.
Detective Johnson, did you interview Kellen Winslow on June 14th, 2018?
Objection. Hearsay.
The jury will completely disregard that answer and not consider it in any way.
With a big dress, Your Honor.
And today, the defense arrested Kellen Winslow II did not testify in front of this jury, but we're going to talk about some of that testimony. And I want to start with the investigator, the defense private investigator who returned to the scene of the alleged rape of Jane Doe 1 and also did some investigating regarding Jane Doe number 2. But let's begin with number 1, where he brought a stopwatch with him as well as he returned to the scene to get a timing. Remember, the story of Jane Doe number 1 is that they park, he goes over the fence, she's on the other side of the fence, and then she joins him after climbing the fence, then they both climb back over, and the alleged attack takes place back in the car. This is Dennis Sesma, defense private investigator.
I went from there, from the bent portion, to the front door of the sushi lounge and to the front door of the cleaners.
Right, that's around the front of the building, right?
Correct.
And how long did that take?
Well, to go from that bent portion, across the dirt, over the sidewalk, around to the front door of the sushi lounge, took me 35 seconds. And to go from the bent portion, again across the dirt and around to the front door of the cleaners, took me 40 seconds.
So the longest it took you to walk from the farthest point to the front of the building would have been 47 seconds?
Yes, correct.
And the shortest trip would have been, under your walk, would have been 17 seconds?
Yes, sir.
All right, so the point being made by the defense is the same point that our crime and justice reporter Ted Rowlands made before their investigator went to the scene, which is how close that fence is to the sushi restaurant and the rest of that strip mall. We've got a map of the parking lot. Let's take a look at that if we can. We'll put that up on the screen for you as we bring back in our think tank for tonight. Okay, if you look on the bottom right hand of the screen, the bottom right hand part, that little alleyway there, that is where the alleged attack took. Bottom right hand corner, folks. And you can see how close that bottom right hand corner, the parking lot, the green, and then there's a fence there. We've got a picture of the fence as well. Let's take a look at that. And this is the fence that Jane Doe number 1 alleges that Kellen Winslow climbed over, got naked on the other side of the fence while she was still on the other side, and then she joined him, and then they both climbed back over. And from that fence to the sushi restaurant that you see right there on the right-hand side of that picture took less than 20 seconds to get there. So let's bring back in the think tank as we talk about the scene of Jane Doe 1's alleged attack. Lieutenant Colonel, you're an investigator. What does it tell you about, what does the physical area, the scene tell you about Jane Doe number 1's version of what happened?
Oh boy, I'm really.
I don't like that reaction if I'm a prosecutor. If you say, "Oh boy,"
As if I was investigating this and Jane Doe 1 was my victim, I would really start to doubt her. I really would. I would not be able to not doubt her based on where the fence is, the location from the fence to the restaurant, which tells me even if you walked and he was on the other side of that fence, you could probably make it at least to a point where someone would see you, maybe someone going to and from the restaurant in the parking lot, whatever the case may be. So I would really have to start to drill that victim without victimizing her again, of course.
Oh, absolutely.
When you have a rape victim, you have to be very careful on how you ask the questions because you don't want it to seem like you don't believe her. That's the worst one. The worst mistakes you can make as an investigator is to make your victim feel like she's not being believed.
But we're focusing on her running for help.
Right.
The speed of sound is faster than the feet of my legs. And she was within earshot of businesses, establishments, people going to their cars. Did she scream for help?
She
Did
jumped
she
over
yell
a
for
fence.
help?
This lady jumped over a fence when he was.
He went over the fence first.
And she's on the other side.
She's on the other side, and then
Go,
she
girl.
followed him onto the other side of the fence.
It doesn't look like an easy fence to just jump over. Meanwhile, if he's on the other side of the fence, he's naked. I don't want to be involved with him. I just walk away while he's on the other side of the fence. Did they count the number of seconds it takes to get over that fence?
No, no one tried to climb the fence itself, and that's another issue with all this is would he be able to climb that? Now he's 6'4", tremendous athlete. I'm sure he could climb the fence, but she said she also climbed the fence. Vic, let me go back out to you. Returning to the scene, that was a big part of the defense case, showing the jury these photos of the place where Jane Doe 1 says she was raped. What do you think about showing the jury that? Is that enough to raise a doubt about her story?
Well, I'll pick up a piece from your other guest there who astutely pointed out that it would raise serious credibility issues with the statement that was given by Jane Doe 1. You don't have to be a lawyer or an investigator or an expert to understand that this story is just odd. It's not 2 o'clock in the morning and you're jumping over a fence that is physically difficult to get over. Now, Mark Harlow's pointed out that the top of the fence did not have a ledge or something smooth on it, therefore leading to the allegation that it could cause a lot of injury. I'll tell you what I'd like to see, and I tell you what a lot of jurors would have liked to see. They'd like to see a dummy of Kellen Winslow's height, a dummy of the victim's height, and some sort of a demonstration on what kind of activity is actually required to scale that fence. We all know it's easy to climb a ladder. It's easy to jump up 10 or 15 steps, but to actually get your feet inside each one of those little chain links to then get yourself over the fence, it's borderline ridiculous as far as the factual description goes. Does that mean the rape did not occur? I don't know. I don't have enough evidence that the judge and the jury and the defense attorneys and prosecutors have combed through to reach that conclusion. I would tell you I would have loved to see a recreation. And maybe that's all part and parcel to how quickly this case has moved along, leaving those similar gaps throughout the story.
Now, something else that the investigator did, the private investigator for the defense, was to talk about the story of Jane Doe number 2. Now, her story is a little bit different. They're in the car and they take a drive down Manchester Avenue. And it's about a 4-mile ride altogether that she takes. And if we take a look at that video, they're going down this road. Now, this is shot during the daytime, but Jane Doe number 2 says it was at night when this drive was taken. And we believe that at some point on this road, according to Jane Doe number 2, they kind of do a turnaround U-turn somewhere and end up on one of the little side roads on the left-hand side of the screen that you're looking at. And the only thing that distinct that she remembered was a gas station, which you kind of see coming up on the right-hand side just before Highway 5. Now, the further testimony of Jane Doe number 2 is that after taking this 4-mile ride, he dropped her off on this road in the dark, and she ends up walking back about 3.5 miles back to where she came from, again, at night. And she said she was scared every time a car came by. She would hide from that vehicle. But you can see it's very, there's nothing here. But you come up after the highway, then there's some apartments on the right-hand side. All right, so how about this evidence for the defense, Lieutenant Colonel? What does it tell you about Jane Doe number 2's story, if anything?
Again, you really can't wrap your head around her explanation of what happened, how it happened. She's saying that she was dropped off in the middle of the night, correct? And she walked, I don't know how long before she even tried to maybe get another person's attention, or another passerby.
She purposely was hiding.
Right.
Her testimony was she was scared that he might come back.
Right. So, I mean, she knew what type of vehicle he was in. I mean, so wait till you see a vehicle that's not matching the description of his vehicle and try to flag someone down. I don't know. You can't really say what was going on in her mind. You know, fear is a strange animal, but she certainly would have had the opportunity, I believe, to get the attention of a good Samaritan, possibly.
I also want to show you pictures that the defense investigator has of the actual Hummer itself. And we'll take a look at this and see what sort of evidence or what this could potentially prove. Now remember, the testimony in the case was that the attacks took place in the front seat, yet in the front seat there was no real forensic type of evidence found. There was some of his semen found in the back seat, which could have been from something else that happened in the back seat. I have no idea. You can see the back seat right there. But the front seat. Vic, in this case, you know, there's not a lot of the physical evidence. There was just enough to link him to both Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2. But inside the actual Hummer, there wasn't really anything useful found for the prosecution, at least from my perspective. What are your thoughts about how the jury handles that? Because we all heard about the CSI effect, right? That the jurors' expectations these days are through the roof for this scientific evidence.
Well, I'm with you, and I think you hit the nail on the head. The expectations are through the roof, but I don't think you have to expect a lot to ask a district attorney's office or a police department to test the very seat where a vicious rape allegedly occurred. I'm a bit befuddled by that lack of evidence, frankly, without offending any of my local colleagues here. I will say, however, that this really dovetails into a belief that he has to testify, or he had to testify. We have physical evidence taken from the vehicle that there's no dispute he operated and was identified as a Jeep-type vehicle, but it was actually identified as the Hummer. There's no dispute about that the women were there and that was his car. So what's the missing link? Of course, there's a lot of opportunity risk calculations when a defendant or suspect takes the stand. But here, on balance, it's hard to convince me, at least, and I may be one on an island, but it's hard to convince me that there was that much detriment or danger in having Mr. Winslow Jr. explain consent. It would seem to be that DNA evidence would be, while lewd and lascivious and awkward or rare, explainable at that point in time.
Yeah, and Ray, the testimony also from Jane Doe number 1 was that she bled a lot.
Right.
They didn't find any blood in that front seat.
No, and let me disagree with my esteemed colleague out west. The reason that the defense wanted to sever these charges, and the reason that the prosecution fought so hard to try them all together, is because the prosecution doesn't have one really good case of the bunch. It's got a bunch of cases, each of which have got a whole lot of problems. And whether they're going to say it or not in closing, what they're trying to tell the jury is, come on, you might explain one person, or maybe there was a misunderstanding, but not all these times. And that's why the defense wanted to try them one at a time and knock them out, and also take those cases out of the similar transaction bad evidence menu by getting a not guilty or maybe a lesser included of a misdemeanor of some type. I don't know all that. So it's become evident as we worked our way through this tonight, especially with the lieutenant colonel here from the law enforcement perspective saying, hey, I'm not so sure. Well, he's the guy that's supposed to be sure, okay, and he's not.
You have to be confident in your case. When you put someone in jail, you have to be 100% confident. The last thing anyone in law enforcement wants to do is to arrest the wrong guy. That you wouldn't be able to sleep at night.
That's worst case scenario. Our
At least
13th
in
juror
my
question
case.
tonight, folks. Are you surprised Kellen